The history of the IQ, very briefly. It was started by, the first IQ test was developed by a French teacher called Binet, Alfred Binet, back in the early 1900s. Now, the problem he faced is he had a varying results among his students in terms of how well they performed academically. And he knew there was something going on. And he developed a test so he could test how good they were with specific patterns that are useful for academic success. So there are particular patterns you need to have to do mathematics. There are particular patterns you need to have to do, for comprehension, and so on. There's certain patterns you need for geometry. So, and he's developed a set of tests for testing students in these specific patterns. By the way, I think Binet was obviously a brilliant man, because he focused on the particular cognitive patterns that are required for academic success. That's Binet. And he came up with this test, did it all, and found that some students weren't so good at manipulating mental images in terms of rotating images and so on. If anybody's done an IQ test, one of the things they test is they take a 2D representation of an object and you've got to be able to rotate it to solve a particular problem, right? And so you've got to be able to do a mental rotation. It's got stuff there on, for comprehension. They've got stuff there for math, for basic math, patterns in math, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's the Binet. And what happened was a man called Terman, a psychologist in the US, who worked at Stanford, got hold of it, and they redesigned it, and they produced an IQ test called the Stanford Binet. The Stanford Binet is the first, and it's probably the biggest, most used, shall I say, the most used IQ test in the world, the Stanford Binet. Now, what Binet said, he did this test, and it came up with a measure, and he gave it a measure called the intelligent quotient, the intelligent quotient, IQ. And he warned, he said, we're reducing it all down. That's reductionism. We're reducing it all down to one number called an IQ number. But an IQ number is not a way of labeling a child. We shouldn't label a child by the IQ number. The function is just a measure. The importance of the test is it defines areas of strength and areas of weakness so that we can do remedial education in the areas of weakness. So his intention for the IQ test was to find patterns of strength and weakness, academic patterns with children, so they could then do something remedial for those specific children to improve their academic performance. Now, I think what he wanted to do with it, his intention for doing it, was brilliant.
Now, guys, just so everyone knows, we come here every Sunday, and every Sunday we have a different speaker. And today's speaker is Chris Collingwood from Sydney. Chris has been in, I would say, self-help, self-improvement, healing, and all this kind of stuff, maybe since the 80s, but still in NLP in the early days. And he was at this actual training with John Grinder. He's been at real life trainings with Richard Bandler and his wife, or his ex-wife, Leslie. So Chris is one of the most well-trained experts in the field that we all have access to, I guess. But today and the previous week, we'll be talking about strategies of genius, and we're looking at what makes someone unique, what makes someone excellence, and then how we can take that on. We're not sure exactly where this session will go today. Well, I'm not exactly sure, but we have 80 minutes. questions as we go along. You'll hear NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, mentioned a fair bit. If you don't know what that is, you'll find out. By the way, Chris has a special training graduate certificate of neuro-linguistic programming, the only university approved postgrad qualification in the field. So if you're looking to go all the way, come join us when we do our training in North Thailand, or join Chris's training. But if you join Chris's training, you'll be able to come into Bali at a greatly reduced rate anyway. So if you want to get the best skills, I believe the best skills in the world, if there is something better that can help me master my life and get better results in whatever I do, I'll go and do it. Yeah. Just after 12, 15 years, I haven't found anything better than neuro-linguistic programming. I've been and I started with mindfulness and neuroscience, shadow work, and a whole pile of modalities, but I keep coming back. And I'm an ICF coach as well, but ICF coaches use tons of NLP. If they tell you they don't, they don't really know what they're talking about. So the ICF coaching is full of NLP, and most therapies, they might not explicitly say this is NLP, but all the different modalities for change work, healing, mentoring, leadership, they all have elements which we have kind of extracted the codes or extracted the excellence. So NLP is kind of like a big field of excellence, and you can apply it anywhere in life. So it's an absolutely amazing field. So I'm very, very glad to be a part of it. Now I'll shut up again.
Okay. Well, well, look, based on what you said, I might just riff on that a little bit. So at the heart of NLP, it's the function of NLP. What the field is set up to do is to take people who are exceptional at what they do and capture and reproduce the patterns of their excellence. That's what it's really all about. And the original modeling so modeling is the process of capturing expertise and expert performance, reproducing it, and building an explicit model of that expertise for transfer to others. And the original people who were modeled were psychotherapists. This is back in the mid-70s. Really, three of some of the tops, well, I would consider one of them to be probably the greatest psychotherapist of the 20th century, a psychiatrist called Milton Erickson. So they modeled built models of Fritz Perls' work, Gestalt therapy, the work of Milton Erickson, and Virginia Satir, the leading family therapist of the time. And a lot of the patterns that they developed were just fabulous for therapy, but also for coaching. And those patterns have been incorporated into a lot of coaching programs and so on. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people don't reference where the patterns they're teaching come from. We're even having this problem with psychology now, where psychology is rediscovering patterns developed in NLP, giving them a new name, and taking credit for the patterns, which I think is just outrageous, because when I was studying psychology, we were warned about plagiarism, and plagiarism is a major, it's really a major sin in psychology, and yet this is what's happened. So Bandler and Grinder have not been credited for a lot of the work that's been taken and reproduced. So, so just for the record, these patterns that I'm covering tonight, and we covered last time as well, some of these patterns, well, all these patterns came from the work of John Grinder, the co-creator of NLP. And if you want to go back to the source, this is the book, Prerequisites to Personal Genius by Delosier and Grinder. But I've made the patterns that are taught in the book explicit. So, as I was saying earlier, some of these patterns are hidden away inside stories. So the metaphors are used to carry the patterns. So I'm just going to quickly recap, and then we'll have a focus for tonight. So, what have I done? Here we are. One of my favorite quotes of John Grinder, the problem is not the problem The problem is the state that you use to approach the context. Now, keep that in mind when we start talking about Elon Musk. So these basically what Grinder and Deleuze found was there are some common patterns used by by people of genius. Basically, the ability to richly represent outcomes. And most of the previous session we did was on some of the processes of rich representation. So how, visualization, but the nuts and bolts of visualization and how you can actually enhance that. The ability to use multiple perceptual positions. We did talk about what that was last time. The ability to construct visual images, so that comes back to how do you represent outcomes, how do you visualize. The ability to use what's a frame, which is called the as-if frame. A sensitivity to communication from their unconscious minds. The ability to chunk up, chunk down, chunk sideways, which is the primary thing I want to talk about tonight. And the ability to enter into an attention external high performance state. So for people properly trained in NLP, the states that you operate from are by choice. And that's really significant. I had a conversation with a friend who knows an NLP trainer who's fairly well known. No names will be mentioned to protect the guilty. And this person is talking about how this person's state has completely fallen apart. They're not managing their state very well. And I was absolutely appalled because they're an NLP trainer. I expect anybody that graduates from our program to be able to manage their state and have and choose the emotional state they operate from, but have it as a choice. And this comes back to this quote of John Grinder. The problem is not the problem. The problem is the state that you use to approach the context. That is the situation where you want to perform. So one of the things that we do is we do some work with this last point, the ability to enter into an attention external high performance states. So there's a whole set of high performance states, and you want to be able to activate a specific high performance state for the situation where you're problem solving. So you activate the state you want, and then you go into the situation, and that's going to improve your performance. And we have a number of exercises for teaching people how to build high performance states. For those more commonly referred to in psychology as flow states. So, and by the way, people of genius often have these intense focus flow states that they're operating from when they're doing what they do, when they're doing their expertise. So as a lot as we talked about last time, I thought we're focusing on two things tonight. Here we are. So, has anybody read any biographies of Elon Musk by any chance? Apart from Adrian? Okay. So one of the things, if you look at Musk, he hasn't built just one successful company. He's built at least two that are very successful. And there's a couple of others that are still, he's still working with that I suspect are going to become very successful later on. So the two that he's most successful so far is Tesla, the car company, which is really a AI company. If we really look at it, it's an AI company, but because they're robots on wheels is what Tesla cars are. and they do have an AI. And the other is SpaceX. Now, he's already been in there from Tesla, but I'll just state a prediction here right now. The money he's made with Tesla is going to be, pretty mild compared with the money he will make with SpaceX. That's the money from SpaceX is, he's going to be generating trillions of dollars a year from that company. Um, um, he's working on Neuralink, which may well become another, billion-dollar company. We'll see. Now, Twitter, not so sure about that. However, he hasn't, and that was not his first business. The first business was PayPal, and that was the first successful business. He walked out of PayPal with about $300 million when they sold PayPal. That was his first business. So there are at least three businesses which are roaring successes. PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX. So it's not a flash in the pan. It's not like, oh, he was just lucky and made some money with a company. He's repeated his success 3 times and probably is going to do it again, at least once or twice more. And one of the things he talks about is to solve problems, he thinks from first principles. And well, it just happens. This is one of the things that people of genius do. They think from first principles. Now, in the 2 autobiographies I read about, they talk about, Musk talks about thinking, solving problems using first principles, but does not really give an explicit, detailed description of what the hell that means. But it's pretty apparent that what he's doing is he's what we call chunking up. So you read the descriptions, you go, oh yeah, this guy's chunking up. And it just happens, this is one of the patterns that John Grinder found with people of genius. When they're solving problems, they chunk up, and that's what really Musk refers to as thinking from first principles. And so what I want to cover tonight is that, and the other thing that one of the other patterns that Musk uses, he comes up with the right question to solve a problem. And as far as Musk is concerned, he says that's the most challenging thing, is finding the right question. And I would agree with him. Now, if we chunk up on that, what's he really talking about? He's talking about framing. So we go back. Component patterns. And we've got something here called outcome, intention, consequences in a well-formed outcome pattern. Outcome, intention, consequences, and well-formed outcomes are both examples of framing. So asking the right question is he is developing the correct frame for solving the problem in whatever the context is that's under consideration. So he finds the correct frame to use, and he combines that with thinking in first principles, which is chunking up. So we've only got 80 minutes. I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about framing. We might have to do that some other time. But for now, let's learn about thinking from first principles. So we even have an explicit model in NLP for thinking in first principles, and it's called logical levels and chunking. Now, I better warn you, if you've read some NLP books, not everything that's called logical levels in the NLP world is actually logical levels. So there's some misinformation about, unfortunately. But anyway, but this is the real thing. And so we can take an area of interest. It might be an area where you want to solve some important problem. It might be an area where you're developing a new product or service. And what we do is we explore the logical levels in that content area, and we use something called a logical inclusion set. Now, where logical inclusion sets come from is the revolutionary work of a mathematician and philosopher from the 1930s and 40s, a man called Bertrand Russell, and it's from a significant, groundbreaking book called Principia Mathematica, or Principles of Mathematics in English rather than Latin. And so Russell did this work on what we call logical levels and logical types. So let's talk about it. So a logical inclusion set is a set of logical levels, which will be explained in a few moments. It's a classification system compiled according to two rules. The first is heritability, in which each member of the set and its subsets inherits all the properties and qualities of the logical type. And this will make sense when we do a practical example. The second is constriction, and each step down from the logical type is narrower and more specific than the step above. So the higher you go is more general. The deeper down, or the lower you go in the logical inclusion set, is more specific. So a logical inclusion set is created using a set of ideas or objects belonging to the same logical type. We haven't defined what a logical type is. That is inheriting all the characteristics of the logical type and exhibiting the appropriate level of constriction, or specificity is a better way of putting it. The logical type defines the inheritable qualities and characteristics which determine whether any specific concept or object belongs to the set. Now, let's get this out of the academic world and just have this make sense, shall we? So let's drop sharing the screen for a moment. So we can take something and build a hierarchy of categorize things in a hierarchy. And so I will start by just giving you an example. So we could say the motor car. There we are. That's the logical type. And we want to find the set within which a motor car belongs. So all we do is you say, what category or set would a motor car be an example of? And anybody can answer that. Okay. Amy Alice has just put one, a vehicle.
Motor car.
Yes, that would be. It's a motorized vehicle.
A motor vehicle. Motorized vehicle.
Yeah. So the higher level there would be a vehicle. And then we go down, we've got a motorized vehicle. Now note that a motorized vehicle is more specific than a vehicle. Is that correct? Of course it is. It's a motorized vehicle. And yet it contains all the qualities that define the vehicle. So it inherits all the qualities of the higher logical level vehicle. Okay, so far? Now we've got motor vehicle. Now we can go down, and I'll just give an example. We can go down. So what would be an example of, or what are some examples that fit in the category motor vehicle? Well, I could say internal combustion engine motor vehicles would fit in the category of motor vehicles. And I could say electric vehicles, because they're still motorized vehicles, aren't they? Electric motor vehicles would fit under within the category of motor vehicles. So that fits within the category of vehicles. So we're now starting to get this hierarchy, aren't we? All good so far? So let's take an electric vehicle. It contains all the qualities of a motorized vehicle. That's the set above. And it inherits all the qualities of vehicles. So we could go down further, let's say, on a electric vehicle, electric motorized vehicle. If we go down, I might say a Tesla electric vehicle. That's more specific, isn't it? And a Tesla electric vehicle carries all the qualities of an electric vehicle that define an electric vehicle, and carries all the qualities that define a motorized vehicle, and contains all the qualities that inherits all the qualities of vehicle. So as we go down, we're having constriction, or another way of putting it, greater specificity, more detail. And I could go down again if I wanted to. So I can take Tesla electric vehicle, and I can say, well, give me an example. Okay, a Model S, a Tesla Model S is a member of the set of Tesla electric vehicles, which is a member of a set of motorized vehicles, which is a member of a set vehicles. Okay, so we're going down even more greater specificity. And I could go down further. I could say a red Tesla Model S electric vehicle. So that's getting even more detail. So that's chunking down. But if we go up, we can say, okay, what is a Tesla electric vehicle? What set is it a member of? We can say motorized vehicles. So we're now chunking up. And what set is a motorized vehicle a member of? Vehicles. So we're chunking it up again. So this is the process of chunking up. And then we can go down where we get greater specificity. We can chunk down where we get greater specificity. Make sense so far? Now, we can also chunk sideways. We haven't talked about chunking sideways yet. So, what would, if we want to chunk sideways from motor vehicles, where could we go? Anybody like to have a guess?
A vehicle, but not, as Amy said, a vehicle, but not a motor vehicle. Some other kind of vehicle, like a paddle vehicle or a
it could be
vehicle.
It could be
wind-powered vehicle.
It could be well, if wind power is still motor, it might be motorized, I suspect. But we could go for, let's say, a horse and carriage. That's an example of a vehicle. So we've just chunked sideways. But you're on the right track, Adrian. How did you do that? Well, how did you come up? How do you chunk sideways? You just go up and think of another member of that set. That's how you go sideways. You chunk up to chunk sideways. So let's go back down. So let's say we've got we have a Tesla electric vehicle. Now, if we're going to chunk sideways from Tesla electric vehicles, to do that, we've got to chunk up and go electric vehicles. What's something else? that's not a Tesla electric vehicle that fits in the category electric vehicles? I'll give you one. A BYD electric vehicle. That's a Chinese electric vehicle, okay? Now, unfortunately, I don't know their model, so I can't chunk down from a BYD electric vehicle. Because,
Dolphin or a seal.
there we are, a seal. I have come across one. A seal.
They're
There we
good
are.
cars.
They're very good cars, by the way. So now I'm chunking down. And by the way, that a seal electric vehicle would be sideways to a Model S, a Tesla Model S. And by the way, if we go sideways to Tesla Model S, we can go for other model Teslas as well. We might say a Tesla Model 3. But they're all examples of Model 3 will be an example of a Tesla electric vehicle. And if we go up to electric vehicles, then we can go across and go down to chunk sideways with Tesla model vehicles would be BYD electric vehicles. And then we can chunk down and say a BYD seal. Is that making sense? So you're getting this logical levels. You can chunk up to the bigger category. You can chunk down with greater specificity. But note, we inherit all the qualities that define each. The qualities that define each higher logical level get carried through, and we become more specific as we go down. And we can also chunk sideways, but all you do to chunk sideways from a specific place in a logical level is go up one and across and come down again. That's how we chunk sideways. So, for example, we could start with something like tea, the drink tea, okay, and we could go, okay, we could chunk down. What would be an example of tea?
Peppermint.
We could go peppermint teas. We could also go. We could go down. We could say teas made from camellia, camellia tea, which is that's the tea most people drink, right? And we can chunk down for camellia tea. We might say black tea. If we go sideways to that, it might be green tea, because it's still an example of camellia tea. You've got green tea, you've got black tea. I think you've got white tea. I think I saw some in China when I was in China. So that would be an example of camellia tea. If we go sideways to camellia tea, another example of a type of tea, peppermint tea. Okay. Now, if we go up from tea, if we want to go up, what would be a category that tea is a member of?
Now, we could go some different ways. I see one in the comments here. Hot drinks. I could
You could
also
say-
say drinks that wake you up.
Yeah, it could be hot drinks. You might say caffeinated drinks. You could say caffeinated drinks. So you can choose the category, but okay, let's say hot drinks. Let's go for hot drinks. Okay, hot drinks. Let's go up from hot drinks. We might just say beverages.
Yeah.
Okay. But note that, let's say we say green tea would be an example of camellia tea, which is an example of tea, which is an example of a hot drink, which is an example of a beverage. So note that all the qualities that define the higher logical levels get inherited, that get carried through as we go down. And we can also chunk sideways if we want to. Making sense? Now, so the way Musk talks about thinking from first principles. So Musk, back, I think, early 2000s, decided he wanted to buy a rocket. Now, how many people do you know? They go, I think I'd love to buy a rocket. So anyway, he decided he wanted to buy a rocket. And so he went to Russia. This is after the end of the Soviet Union, and they had a few spare ICBMs without the actual payloads sitting around. So he went there and had a chat to them, and they gave him a bit of a hard time. Oh, he's like, he's just a child as far as they were concerned, and they were drinking vodka and trying to get him pissed, and wouldn't take him seriously. So he got really pissed off about this. So he's in his private jet flying back. And what he did, he thought, now, well, what do I want? He knows what he wants the rocket for. Okay. He already decided he really wanted a rocket. And he went through and he organized things basically into a logical conclusion set. But he talked about it as thinking in first principles. So he decided, well, what is a rocket? What are its components that make up a rocket? And he got one head of a mind. He knocked out one head of a spreadsheet and basically worked out what it should cost to build a rocket based on, what are the elements that go into building a rocket. And by the end of the flight, he decided he was going to start a company that would manufacture and fly rockets. And that's how SpaceX started. But he worked out that if you really looked at the cost of the raw materials, that that it's just a matter of engineering, engineering the materials, that he should be able to produce a rocket at a hell of a lot cheaper than anybody else could. And but anyway, he went back to what are the basics that are required for a rocket.
So, Chris, if I can ask, we can all understand chunking, but what is it about the way Elon does it, or do we just do it poorly? Do most people not do a good job of chunking? Or
okay, so one of my graduates, I spoke to him on Friday. It was his birthday. He's become a mate. I've known him for 20 years now. I guess I gave him a phone call, wish him a happy birthday, and we got talking as we do about patterns and people's inability to chunk up. So he's saying, oh, he's making a lot of money. He's got a piece of technology that he's selling that is 10 times more effective and 10 times cheaper than what's typically used for mining exploration. And so they can significantly cheaper. They can very quickly they can say, this is the mineral that's under the ground. This is where it is. This is how much of it is there. And this is the shape of it and all the rest of it. It's really quite amazing technology. And he said, look, I'm working with some really good people. He said, but they're calling me up. He said, because he said, I was going to take the day off for my birthday, and I got my first phone call at 7:30 this morning. And I've been working the whole day. And I said, oh, well, that's typical, mate. I know that's exactly what you do, Well, I hope you're going to do something tonight, with your wife. I hope you go out and celebrate your birthday. And he said, oh, yeah. And he said, look, they got this problem, some colleagues, and they phoned them up with this problem. He said, look, if only they had just chunked it up and then thought about it in terms of patterns. He said, it took me 5 minutes to solve the problem for them. But he said they got caught up in the content and they weren't chunking up. And look, this friend of mine, we have lots of conversations. We're good mates. And one of the typical things we end up talking about is the inability with people we meet in the world who don't think in patterns. They get caught up in content. That's one problem. And the other significant problem we've identified, and so is John Grinder. I've spoken to John Grinder about this. People are poor at chunking up. People get lost in the specifics and they forget what the hell they're doing something for. So a person may have an outcome, the blinkers go on. I'm going to get this outcome no matter what, right? The blinkers are on.
Blinkers are on.
And they've forgotten about what the hell am I doing this outcome for? What is my intent for doing this outcome? They're not chunking up. I mean, I remember seeing.
I had a little so it may not necessarily be an inability, but a reluctance to, or an unaware to, or as you said, those blinkers come up, and they're stuck in the content where
I think it's the culture.
The culture, yeah.
I think it's in. Now I can't speak for other cultures. All I can say is for the Anglosphere, because the only countries I've lived in speak English. So in all the countries I've lived in, they're all English speaking. I spent time in the US, time in the UK, time in New Zealand, and of course here's my home. People are just not chunking up. So people get caught up in the content that they're working with. Now, content's important. I'm not denying the importance of content, but people tend to chunk down. They're not thinking in patterns and they're not chunking up. So if I use the term reification, people come across the word reification. So I'll give you an example of reification in psychology. So my background is I've got a psychology degree as well, and very interesting. I don't think it's as useful as the NLP by any stretch of the imagination, but I still enjoyed it, and it's still a lot of fun when I did my psych degree. But so the IQ. So the history of the IQ, very briefly. It was started by, the first IQ test was developed by a French teacher called Binet, Alfred Binet, back in the early 1900s. Now, the problem he faced is he had varying results among his students in terms of how well they performed academically. And he knew there was something going on. And he developed a test so he could test how good they were with specific patterns that are useful for academic success. So there are particular patterns you need to have to do mathematics. There are particular patterns you need to have to do, for comprehension, and so on. There's certain patterns you need for geometry. So, and he's developed a set of tests for testing students in these specific patterns. By the way, I think Binet was obviously a brilliant man, because he focused on the particular cognitive patterns that are required for academic success. That's Binet. And he came up with this test, did it all, and found that some students weren't so good at manipulating mental images in terms of rotating images and so on. If anybody's done an IQ test, one of the things they test is they take a 2D representation of an object and you've got to be able to rotate it to solve a particular problem, right? And so you've got to be able to do a mental rotation. It's got stuff there on for comprehension. They've got stuff there for math, for basic math, patterns in math, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's the Binet. And what happened was a man called Terman, a psychologist in the US, who worked at Stanford, got hold of it, and they redesigned it, and they produced an IQ test called the Stanford Binet. The Stanford Binet is the first, and it's probably the biggest, most used, shall I say, the most used IQ test in the world, the Stanford Binet. Now, what Binet said, he did this test, and it came up with a measure, and he gave it a measure called the intelligent quotient, the intelligent quotient, IQ. And he warned, he said, we're reducing it all down. That's reductionism. We're reducing it all down to one number called an IQ number. But an IQ number is not a way of labeling a child. We shouldn't label a child by the IQ number. the function as just a measure. The importance of the test is it defines areas of strength and areas of weakness so that we can do remedial education in the areas of weakness. So his intention for the IQ test was to find patterns of strength and weakness, academic patterns with children so they could then do something remedial for those specific children to improve their academic performance. Now, I think what he wanted to do with it, his intention for doing it, was brilliant. I think he was a fantastic person, to have done that incredible work. And he warned against reducing it down to a number and focusing on the number. So Tierman from Stanford, who modified Binet's IQ and it became the Stanford Binet, has all got reduced down to a number. That's reductionism. Now, it's a long explanation of reductionism, but there's a tendency for people to reduce things down to a simple summary. That's reductionism. And to forget what the hell is the function or purpose, or another word, intention for whatever the outcome is. The intention is chunking up from an outcome. So the intention of Binet's original IQ, the intention was to have a tool so the outcome was to have a tool to find strengths and weaknesses in academic performance so it could be corrected. The intention was to correct that to improve children's academic performance. That was the intent. The flow-on consequences of this was you ended up with people overly focusing on the IQ number and going and accepting labels and focusing on the label rather than going, if I had an IQ test, I would want to know what were areas where I was strong and weak so that I could focus on the weak areas. That's the benefit. Instead, by the way, when I was studying psychology, we were told that most of a person's so-called IQ is supposedly fixed, is what we were taught, which is outrageous. There's lots of counter arguments to that, because if IQ is really about getting a read output on a person's ability to do certain specific types of patterns, therefore, surely you can train the person in the patterns where the person's weak. Surely. And then there's hard evidence in the world that IQ is actually malleable. So there's a piece of work done by a psychologist who died just a few years ago. American guy who worked in Otago, New Zealand, some university in Otago, who wrote a famous book, and he looked at IQ over the last 100 years, and because they've got records of all this, and they've found that so an IQ of 100 is average, but the way they get that is they take all the people who've had an IQ test in the last 12 months, and then whatever measure you get is against that average. So the average is going to be 100 no matter what. It's always going to be, average will always be 100 in terms of normal distribution and statistics. However, but when you look at the actual results and you look at it over the last 100 years, IQ in Western nations has been going up every decade. So a person with an IQ of 100 today, now I'm just making this part up, but would probably I haven't seen the actual figure, it'd be something like 120 back in 1900 or 1920 or something, because it's normalized for the previous, basically the previous 12 months, and that's where the average was organized, is how they set the average. But when you look historically, IQ's been going up, going up. So IQ's been going up every decade. There's explanations for this. There's some interesting hypothesis for this, which I happen to think is probably likely. It's because we're living in a more complex world where people have to think abstractly in their work. Back in 1900, 90% of people who lived in rural areas were doing farming work. I think 4% of the population, was it 3%, working in agriculture nowadays. Most people living in cities. Most people do jobs that didn't exist 50 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. And the type of work people do today, to be successful in your work, have to be able to, you actually need to be able to think in terms of patterns, and you need to be able to think in abstractions. So as the environment has created a context where people have to develop better pattern recognition skills. That's my opinion about it. So backing up to all this, so reification, and this thing of people, this pattern I see of people getting lost in the detail and forgetting what the higher logical level is for whatever they're doing. And so logical conclusion set, we can use this for just about anything. We can chunk things up, start finding, and that combined with getting damn good at doing pattern recognition is the other thing. And framing, as I said earlier tonight. I think those are the key skills to develop. And these are the things that some of these people genius do. They chunk up, I can chunk up, down, and sideways. But the important thing is that I think is missing is chunking up for a lot of people, and making this distinction between content and pattern. So even the story I told, the content was about being A, but in the story, I still caring and illustrating with the content. I was illustrating patterns. Does that make sense?
And it's a bit hard, but we naturally and often get stuck in the problems and in the content. So got to train ourselves or make sure we keep chunking up and being aware.
Yeah. So I'm going to give another example. So I did I trained myself in NLP to begin with because there are no NLP trainers in the country. So that's giving away my age, a long time ago. So I imported all the books on NLP. So I had all 3 books because that's all there were at the time. The books were over my head. The first book I read was Structure Magic, Volume 1, a book about language and therapy. And it's basically a book on linguistics. And I only had high school grammar. And so I read that book 5 or 6 times until it made sense. Because, I'd already read something about NLP and I went, my God, I want to learn this. Because I was lucky. I kind of got it right away that it was all about patterns. So I read this book over and over again until it made sense. And I've just lost my train of thought. So about that. So oh dear, I've just lost my train of thought. Okay, I was using it as a metaphor and I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. Look, it's been a long weekend for me of lounging around and spending time with my wife and, going for walks in the sunshine. So I bloody well a little bit tired. But so chunking. But anyway, I remember reading later when it came out. The 4th book I read was called, which came out 8 or 9 months later, a book called Frogs and the Princes. And I remember reading it, and it was just packed full of patterns. A lot of the key stuff in NLP is just in that book. It's all there. And I read that thing through and went, oh, yeah, there's a pattern. So somehow I knew, I got right from the start, that it was all about patterns. And but anyway, when you start looking at these people like the Elon Musks of the world, he thinks in patterns, that guy, and he chunks up, and he also gets the right questions, which is a framing issue. So he finds the right frame to apply in solving a problem. Oh, that's where we were going. Just found my thread. So I was already NLP trained before I did my psychology degree. I thought I better get one. I decided to get one to cover my ass, to make sure that I could never be stopped by a government or an authority from doing the work that I love doing. So I had my thoughts at the time. There's talk of putting controls on people doing hypnosis, for example. There was a new state government got into power, and there was talk they were going to put restrictions on who could do hypnosis. And I thought, the hell with this, I better go get a degree. So anyway, I knew what I was doing my degree for when I signed up for a psychology degree. However, what was fascinating to me was the number of students. So on my first day, first semester, first lecture, first day, the lecture theatre was absolutely packed with people standing at the back, people sitting on the stairs, on the steps, on the tiers, because there was not enough seats. Now, first lecture, second semester, about 1/3 of the seats were empty. What had happened? Well, a whole stack of students had gone, I didn't realize psychology was going to be like this. And they decided to shift to some other major. Now, I was a mature age student. I knew what I was doing the degree for. I knew, what do I want? My outcome. What do I want it for? I had a set of intentions for doing the degree. I walked in with my eyes wide open. I knew that a lot of what we're going to be doing was experimental psychology and lots of statistics, because I did my research before doing it. But I knew what I was doing it for. Now, I spoke to some of my peers who had dropped out of psychology, and I found out, well, I'm interested in people, but I didn't realize it's all about rats and stats, as they say. But they didn't really know what psychology was about before they experienced their first few lectures. And they weren't really clear about what their intentions were for doing a psychology degree. They hadn't chunked up. Now, if you chunk up, we recommend you chunk up at least one, if not two, logical levels on every outcome you have. Well, I won't say every outcome, the important outcomes that you have. So you go, this is my outcome. This is what I'm doing it for. This is what I want this outcome for. Because then, if you're progressing on an outcome and you run into a roadblock, or there's some change in the environment that makes that outcome not as tenable as it was when you began, because you know what you're doing it for, you can design an alternative outcome. You can find another outcome that's going to support the intention. Why don't we make this real? Let's demonstrate this very quickly. Now, we're going to do it content-free, so you don't need to disclose anything personal, because we're working with patterns. Isn't that brilliant about we can work with patterns? You don't have to divulge anything personal. You can even do what I call, secret therapy. I love the idea of secret therapy. So you can actually do some therapy if you want to. We're not doing that tonight, therapy, but anyway, you can do some therapy and you never have to tell anybody, the therapist, what the content is.
In February 2024, we embarked on a transformative journey in the heart of Bali, where minds were empowered, connections were built, and breakthroughs were achieved.
Hey guys, we're here having the time of our life. The time of our life. It's a combination of learning new stuff and celebrating all the growth and the transformation we've had this year.
As the sun set on our time in Bali, a new adventure awaits us in Chiang Mai, 2025.
Hey, a couple of important things if you want to come down to get the most out of this. I ask everyone to make a shopping list before coming here, a shopping list. New behaviors, new beliefs, perhaps value systems, or maybe a whole new identity. So before everyone comes, they create a bit of a wish list, a bit of a shopping list. And while we're here, we make it happen. Now that pre-course, we actually include a lot of our, like the training that we sell for thousands of dollars, we actually include that in a lot of our training. So when you come along, you're gonna get access to that and go through it and make this trip absolutely dynamite for you.
Join us as we continue our journey of growth and transformation. Together, we thrive. See you in Chiang Mai.